Hi, everyone. Welcome to Catalyst for the new Future of Work session on Accelerate Her at London Tech Week. I am delighted to be joined by Mercedes, Irene, and Sarah on the call. I'm sure our audience is no stranger to the facts that I'm about to mention, but I'm going to go ahead and mention them anyway to set the stage for our discussion. According to McKinsey's Women in the Workplace 2020 study, pre-COVID-19 research had never shown women opt out of the workforce at higher rates than men. In every year through 2019, the average overall attrition rate for companies was even slightly higher for men than women. But in 2020, 1 in 4 women were considering either leaving the workforce or downshifting their careers versus 1 in 5 men. While all women have been impacted, 3 major groups have experienced some of the largest challenges, and those are working mothers, women in senior management in all industries, and Black women in the US. And imagine the impact on women in tech. I'm not even going there. Last piece, World Economic Forum's 2020 Gender Gap Report says, another generation of women must wait for gender parity as an extra 36 years added to the time remaining to close the gender gap because of the impact of COVID-19. So, didn't necessarily mean to start on a doom and gloom note, but that's what the picture is today. So together with our 3 esteemed guests, we will be talking about the impact of COVID on the female workforce, and how new work patterns are affecting women in the workplace. But before we dive into the discussion, of course, I'd like to welcome our panelists to get to know them a little. So we have Mercedes McPherson. She is the Chief People Officer for EMEA at Globant. We have Irene Chan joining us from the US, and she is the Professional Development Lead for Women Excelling in Life and Leadership at NASA. And last but not least, we have Sarah Healy, who is the Permanent Secretary at the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport in the UK. So once again, welcome everyone. And before we dive into the topic, I would love to hear about your backgrounds. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your role, your journey to where you are today? But I'm also curious, have you returned to office yet? Or are you really looking forward to going back to the office? So Irene, if we can start with you.
Absolutely. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're watching this. My name is Irene Chan. I hail from sunny Los Angeles, California, but I'm a transplant here at NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston. No one in my family ever dreamed of having an engineer in their family. I just was always attracted to flight, so I thought aerospace was the thing to do. I love the human element in it. That's why I kept going for human spaceflight. There are so many NASA centers. There are a few in California, so everyone's like, you're a California girl. Why won't you stay in California? I'm like, I want to help advance human spaceflight, and that's where it is here in Houston, Texas. So to address your question, I have not made it back into the office yet, but I am afforded the luxury of being able to pursue my job task here at home in the comforts of my home. But being a people person, I would definitely love to go back into the office. My day-to-day job is the International Space Station flight planning engineer. I help coordinate with all of our international partners. That's our European Space Agency, our Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency, our Russian Space Agency, and all the different NASA centers and commercial partners to put together a nice schedule to make sure we could transport all of our astronauts and all the necessities, their food, the things you take for granted like air and other supplies to make sure they could stay up there for 6 months at a time. So I'm just helping communicate between these different organizations to make sure we have that nice flight plan right there. But while I'm here today, I'm representing the Women Excelling in Life and Leadership Employee Resource Group. As Funda had mentioned, this is one out of many women employee resource group at NASA. Again, there's multiple NASA centers and almost each one of them has their own respective women's employee resource group. So today I'm speaking from the perspective of Johnson Space Center. Thank you for having me this morning, afternoon, or evening. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much for joining us, Irene. Mercedes, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Very happy to be here. Very honored to be part of this panel as well. So as I mentioned before, I have just relocated to Madrid. I'm the Chief People Officer for the EMEA region at Globant. I just relocated from Bogota, from Colombia, where I lived for the last 3 years. And then I started working with Globant 12 years ago in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, the southernmost part of South America. That's where the company was originally founded. Now we are over 20,000 Globers around the world, distributed in 17 countries. And very proud to be a Glober. Originally, my background is in international relations, so I'm not an engineer, but I love engineering, and the main reason why I love this industry is because it's about knowledge, and it's about virtue, and it's about merit. And I admire the people that I work with. I admire, the the diverse culture that we have been able to build. I love the fact that we have engineers, designers, project managers, people who are experts in video and edition and sound, artists who create beautiful software, uh, people who have so many different areas of expertise. And when we come together, innovation happens. So very proud to be here. I'm back at the office. I've been back in the office here for the last 2 months. And it's been an amazing change because it's been over a year of working from home, being a mom, trying to cook, take care of the household, and then have a full-time job with a lot of responsibility. During this time, I also led the COVID committee, which was actually a very interesting joint effort where every area got together to be on the same page and sync up so that everything we did had this connection between us. And honestly, it was a very powerful experience. So very happy to be back and experiencing like this new normality, this new normal that we are. And also, it's been so different in so many countries that in some places we're gradually returning, and some others we're still not ready to do that. So very grateful that I'm able to be back in this beautiful office today and participating here with all of you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, Mercedes. Sarah?
Thank you. So I'm the Permanent Secretary at the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, which, if you don't know what a Permanent Secretary is, that's quite understandable. And one of my favourite stories about this was my predecessor in this job tells a story about how she once went abroad, and the job title was completely mistranslated to end up saying she was a heavenly everlasting typist. What it basically means is that I'm the most senior civil servant, so official, kind of non-political person in this department. I've been permanent secretary since April 2019, so the first year was relatively normal, and since then maybe not so much. And as a department, we cover all sorts of fantastic policy areas, ranging from all sorts of things to do with digital and technology policy, data protection. We work on digital infrastructure, so the sort of building of broadband and fiber networks, on telecoms regulation. We also work on media, so we do policy to do with the internet, social media, online safety, and indeed broadcasting. But also, we get the sort of delight of doing all of those fantastic forward-facing, innovative, kind of growth-orientated parts of the economy. And then, in addition, which I think people haven't really realised the kind of huge significance of both as an economic part as an economic contribution, but also kind of the significance of these things to our lives. We also cover culture, heritage, arts, and sport. So all of our museums that have also spent so much of this year closed, and in fact, the parts of the economy that have suffered, I think, most during the course of the pandemic. So everything to do with events and going to the theatre, and we essentially sort of shut most of our sectors come last March, and it's been a really challenging time for them. So it's been quite fascinating running this organisation, because obviously the sort of role of digital and tech has become even more significant than anyone even realized it was, kind of because we've been relying on these kind of forms of communication, and the importance of our internet connection and the use of different online tools in order to collaborate with each other. And that part of the department, you know, that sort of has felt this big sense of sort of boom and kind of and significance, while the rest of what we do kind of was really going through a terrible period. So and you know, government's done an enormous amount to support them through that, with a £2 billion fund to do so. But it was particularly upsetting to have to close our wonderful museums and galleries twice over. Office-wise, so I should just say, yes, I've been a civil servant. So I'm based in London. I've been a civil servant just over 20 years. It was my 20th anniversary this year. I really enjoy being a civil servant, but I mainly enjoy working at this great department, which is full of fantastic people and does such important work. Office-wise, well, I'm sort of testing the hybrid approach, so I'm a bit sort of in between Mercedes and Irene, so that's quite a good kind of contrast, isn't it? So I didn't come in at all for about sort of 3 months last year, and then since then, sort of gradually up to about 2-3 days a week. And it varies, you know, sometimes I'm at home, sometimes I'm in the office, sometimes I'm at home more, sometimes I'm in the office more. During the summer, I spent a bit more time at home because my ministers weren't in the office. These days, I'm planning on spending at least 3 days a week in the office, partly because I'm living temporarily in the house next door to mine while mine is being renovated, and it's all open plan. And the second somebody comes in from school, I've got 3 children who are 17, 15 and almost 13. And the second someone comes in from school, they interrupt all of my calls and I can't get anything done. So I've decided to spend a little bit more time in the office than I think I would have done if I was still living in my house, where I had a bit more space and privacy. So I really kind of feeling very strongly for the experience, especially of mothers with kind of younger children, in particular, working mothers who kind of we referenced at the start have had a particularly tough time during the pandemic. My children are a bit older, and my husband and I thanked our luck every single day during the early part of lockdown, because they were actually able to some degree to take care of themselves, and we couldn't imagine how we would have been able to cope, to be honest, if with both of us with very big full-time jobs, if this had happened when they were significantly younger than they are. And it really made me also feel a huge degree of sympathy for some of our young members of staff. So DCMS's average age is 29, which is pretty young. So I know that many of my staff have spent the whole of this pandemic sort of in the corner of their bedroom, or trying to kind of juggle use of a bad internet connection with 3 other roommates. That has been extremely difficult for them. So I'm also pleased for them that we're able to return to office working, and my current circumstances have made me just reflect on how tough that must have been for them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. As all of you were talking, I'm thinking in the background, as habit, I should say, how wonderfully diverse we are. Like, we're across the globe, all over the place, but diverse backgrounds in terms of industry, in terms of working environments. So I'm loving that different perspectives, and I'm sure we're going to have different perspectives into the questions that I have prepared as well. So I personally have been a remote worker for the past 10 years or so. And during these past 20 or so months, one of the biggest silver linings for me was that all my colleagues and other fellow office workers had a better understanding of what it really is like to work from home. Or even, dare I say, they probably realized that I really was working all this time. So, but even for me, it was a challenge, right? Like I've been working from home for almost 10 years, not fully. I used to go to the office, but primarily from home. But even for me, it was challenging in so many different levels. Like you, Sarah, I have two teenagers, 17 and 15, and I thanked heavens every single day throughout the first 6 months of the pandemic where they could cook for me, instead of vice versa. So, but then again, like even though I was super, used to being home, working from home, I wasn't used to having my husband doing his work in the living room or teaching his classes in the living room. I wasn't used to having kids, well, no longer kids, but kids at home all the time, demanding one thing or the other, even though they were self-reliant, right? Like, and it took all of us to get used to a new way of life and work, making home workplace for all of us. So I'm curious, right? Like, I know, Sarah, you mentioned a little bit about this, but I'm curious about your personal experiences and observations in your organizations. What was the most challenging part for you and your, fellow female colleagues within the organization? How did this remote work affected, women different than men? And one of the debates that I personally have in my mind too, like, has it been good for women to have this flexibility to work from home, or is it the opposite? Like, have we been impacted by working from home even worse? Of course, it depends on your life stage as well, but just curious as to your personal experiences and observations. Mercedes, you want to start us?
Sure. Well, I think from our perspective, and we have been able to survey and have a constant dialogue with Glovers, that's how we call our employees, and 31% of our leaders are female workers. So understanding specifically how they were dealing, was it affecting us in a different way? And the answer is yes. It has affected us in a different way because it's proven that we have had more responsibilities in terms of household, in terms of, taking care of children. In many cases, obviously, working mothers with small children, as you mentioned, were the ones having the biggest challenges for sure. And it was very evident because this pandemic also allowed us to enter the house, everyone's house. So we would be able to see it, kids playing around or demanding or being part of a conversation. That was a new scenario for all of us. And honestly, at the very beginning, we didn't know how to react. I think we had to adjust to that. And after a while, it was more of a normal scenario. The other situation that added a lot of additional stress on women was homeschooling. We had to, in many countries, again, the situation was very different, but education was not ready to go online 100%. Especially we saw that in many Latin American countries. So children really needed a lot of support and help, and we needed to print things so that they would be able to be ready for the class, and we would need to get involved in the class and support and assist. And many times support and assist the teachers as well. So it added more fronts really where it was very hard to focus. And what was also surprising was that the number of women who lived in the same household with older adults that maybe may have had additional help before, but were no longer receiving that additional help. So those were the groups of people who raised their hands and said, I need help. And, and specifically what they requested was flexibility. I need flexibility to move around meetings. I need flexibility to propose what times work better for me. so that I can take maybe my lunch breaks, or I can assist my children in a specific time slot. So I think that was highly appreciated. And we, again, learned during that process as leaders that, we needed to be much more adaptable, and we needed to understand and take into consideration everyone's needs, which may have, which were different. We had main caregivers, or only parents who, or divorced parents who had schedules that were, different according to the week. So what we did, one of the things that worked out the best for us, is saying, okay, let's touch base every morning. So we created this initiative called Side by Side, so we would able to understand how everyone's dealing with this within our teams, within our projects or areas. What can we do to make your life easier, was basically, we're very used to talking about results. We're very easy. The software industry is very agile. So what are the obstacles that we're facing in the project? Now it was shifting towards, what are the obstacles that we're facing as a group, as human beings, as mothers, as, as children having to support our parents? Or it became much more complex. And I think we're entering everyone's lives again in a very different way. It's not just in the workspace, but we're entering your living room. You were entering, your house, and everyone's house. So we're trying to tidy up our spaces so that it looks nice and neat. I think it gave us so many fronts to work on. And I think as organizations, at least, we had to become, and as leaders, we had to be much more very, very receptive of what was happening. Each individual was going through a different situation. It fluctuated a lot during, it's been like a long, over a year, a long period of time where we have been able to see exhaustion. We have, at the beginning, it was maybe, very different from the different stages. It was not linear. It was not like a flat line. It had a lot of ups and downs. So we understood that we had to communicate a lot, and take that pulse and understand how do we respond then based on those different stages. So I think it's been we as organizations have also been able have been in that spot where we need to be learning agents and adapt to the different situations that we have had. So that would be my response.
Thank you. That definitely resonates with me. Irene, I'm curious. I have to make this joke. Did you hear the phrase, Houston, we have a problem, more often?
Surprisingly, no, because we're all, our hairs are on fire. So we collectively know it. We have a problem, but we're problem solvers. We always have that can-do attitude. And we've seen through the past 20 plus months, we're very resilient.
How did it differ for NASA and for you and for other female associates within NASA through this period? Maybe like similarities and differences from what Mercedes was talking, because I saw you nodding a lot during what's her response.
A lot to echo back, and being NASA, we're data driven. So in front of me, I actually have spreadsheets and bar charts showing all of this stuff. Collectively, we did a lot of surveys periodically through this whole experience. And just to echo Mercedes, the challenge is like, it feels like working from home and more like living at work. And one thing that my colleague had noticed was a lot of women within NASA are hesitant to turn on their video cameras because they don't want people to peek into the hairiness of, oh gosh, my kids are running amok here. I am not prim and proper in my makeup and hair. I personally don't care about makeup, but folks just want to put on their best face. And as women, we feel like we have that added layer of, we need to be very presentable or else our colleagues won't take us seriously in our work. And like Mercedes had said, the main takeaway we wanted to convey to our leadership is flexibility, awareness, and acceptance of everyone's circumstance is essential for us to be able to do our work. One of my own personal challenges throughout this experience was setting boundaries. I'm always a go-getter. It's like, I want to ensure mission success. So, oh, I worked 12 plus hours already when I'm supposed to only have a 40-hour work week. Ooh, but I have this driving deadline. Let me go, go, go. So I personally don't have kids yet, but I even have that difficulty setting boundaries like, oh, I have personal commitments, but wait a minute, I just want to do this one last thing at work. Let me type away. And before you know it, it just blends in. And my husband also works here at NASA Johnson Space Center. So we're side by side. We actually converted our dining table into one large office desk for the both of us. So you could imagine 3 monitors at both ends of the dinner table. He is an astronaut trainer, a flight control trainer for the emergency equipment that goes up to space station. So I'm always hearing his technical stuff. He's hearing my technical stuff. It's just loud in our house. I'm not accustomed to that, hearing his stuff. He's like that close to me. Right now, I'm actually in another room so he could focus on his simulation thing. But you see that. You see folks, children popping in going, oh, hey, mom, hey, pop, what's going on here? But we have been gracious. So extending grace is another big theme. We have to understand each other's unique circumstance. We focus on the parents, but the folks that live by themselves, the loneliness that they feel, because you do get fatigue interacting over Teams or over Zoom and what have you, but they need that human to human interaction. So that's why we're in dire need of going back into the office, but with circumstances, we need to roll with these IT challenges because some folks may not be as savvy, because again, at NASA, folks that are supporting the mission are not just engineers, they're also your admins, your budget analysts. We come from all walks of life, and we need to recognize that not everyone's tech savvy. We need to extend some extra grace to help them be in an ideal work situation to do what they need to do. But on the flip side, it has been a benefit working from home. Folks feel like they could do work in more flexible hours and maintain their sanity to maintain their other personal commitments. They may not only be parents, but they may also be caregivers to elderly parents or to someone with special needs within their families. So it just covers a whole spectrum of folks and different needs that we need to address here.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Irene. And Sarah, I want to take the question a little further with you because you already mentioned, some of the different life stages on your first response that, younger associates in your team have different challenges. So what are these so-called new work patterns? What are we talking about when we say new work patterns? And do they actually benefit women, or do they appear to be work in women's favor? Is flexibility as good as it sounds? Or, as Irene mentioned, are we going to a place where we have no boundaries now? We end up working 12, 13, 14 hours a day without even realizing it. So these new work patterns, how does it affect the female workforce in general? And I would love for you to mention a little more about the different intersectionalities, especially different generations, different life stages.
That's a formidable challenge to cover such a fundamental topic, but I shall do my best. So when you first mentioned the sort of 13, 14 hours, what is this flexibility? It reminds me of a wonderful story my friend told me. She started a new job during COVID. She's a very good old friend. She has 3 teenagers as well. And she said she sat down at her dining table to start work about 7 a.m. and she ate breakfast on the side, and then she couldn't really get up from her desk because she was very, very busy. And her husband brought her a bowl of soup for lunch, which she sort of ate, sort of leaning over here. And then one of her children made her dinner, and she sort of leant over here and ate that and carried on at her desk. And then just after that, finally about sort of 9:30, 10 p.m., she sort of stopped and sat down for a glass of wine with her husband and said, I love this flexibility, is just fantastic. And it took him pointing out that she actually hadn't moved for, around 15 hours. And that maybe that like wasn't flexibility, that was working a little bit too hard and too long. Gosh, what do I think? So, I mean, one thing to say is just to echo some of those points about caregiving, where, you know, I really, you know, I sometimes just really want to wish we could get away from a sort of stereotype of that, you know, that falling on women. But actually, sort of, I did a bit of research, and indeed in my house, kind of, my husband has never thought that child rearing was my job. He thought it was something we did together. But the facts remain that I know there was a survey done in Norway where in 2019, professional women lost over 5,000 euros of income from unpaid work, household chores and childcare. And in 2020, that more than doubled. So they lost 10,000 euros of income in that way. And another survey of professional professionals showed that 75% of women during COVID have been primarily responsible for ensuring that children were cared for, against 18% of men. So, you know, these things unfortunately just still are the way that they go. And working at home has obviously kind of at a time when children were not necessarily in school full time, has obviously had a kind of extra impact on that. But let's just sort of pause and say, but what is it like in the long term? So I think there are some real positives here that you could build on as well. So, I mean, from my own experience, I would say I've never actually spent so much time kind of, you know, being around when my children come back from school. That's something that has never been part of their lives, and they've really appreciated. And I am fortunate enough to be senior enough to be able to manage my time to be able to see them for some of that. Other things that we do to sort of support and help our health and well-being, I would constantly be in a rush to get to the gym. Like, going to the gym was something which involved kind of an extraordinary amount of logistical activity and kind of a lot of pre-planning. And, you know, it would always be on the edge of, you know, I would literally be the person running into the spin studio just before they shut the doors and kind of leaping on my bike and sort of hoping it didn't need adjusting because I wouldn't have time. And actually, kind of the benefits of being able to exercise in my home, I've got a Peloton and I can just get on my bike whenever I have kind of a teeny bit of time. And that has been a sort of huge benefit to my sense of kind of well-being, the lack of traveling time eating into my day. So let's face it, there are ways in which this kind of flexibility can be a very, very good thing when we're not also trying to cope with caring responsibilities 100% of the time, but we've got our sort of normal support systems around us, which otherwise we lost at various points during the course of the last 18 months. But one of the things that I think is challenging is figuring out how you make sure that we're using those that a hybrid kind of working with some people in the office and some people at home at different times for different periods of time doesn't end up disadvantaging those who are at home. So if we imagine that women might be keener to take advantage of that kind of flexibility, though I have to say, kind of one of the other great things about the civil service is that we have something in the UK called shared parental leave, where you can share parental leave after a child. And there's a very, very sort of substantial proportion of my male civil servants who have babies, they take it up. And that is just brilliant. And I love it when they sort of say, I want to go for X number of months. And, you know, sometimes they're off at the same time as their partner. Sometimes they take over primary responsibility for caring. But kind of, it is true that a lot of the time it's women who are seeking that kind of flexibility. And what we don't need is that the fact that they're not present in the office. And you said at the start, Panda, didn't you, that you had an experience where previously your colleagues maybe didn't think you were working when you were working at home. And we can imagine getting into those kind of prejudices again. If you're not there, can everyone see that you're working? Also, how do you kind of set up systems and processes that ensure that you don't miss out on that kind of casual interaction that gets work done in a particular way and can sometimes be a more efficient way of doing things? I mean, you taught Mercedes about coming up with different kind of meeting patterns that just meant that everybody could share information in a more informal way and about how they were feeling and their well-being kind of more consistently. And what we need is to not, when we return to hybrid ways of working, assume that office working is the same as it used to be. Office working has to change, just as kind of home working is a different kind of way of doing things. So, you know, when you have large meetings, is it better for everyone to join remotely, whether you're in the office or not? how do we structure the working week? I mean, the civil service expectation, I think, will be that, certainly in my department, we've said that our sort of general expectation would be that people are in about 2 days a week. Well, how do you structure your time more effectively to make sure that it's on those 2 days you're doing the kind of collaborative in-person work that is best done like that, and you're using the rest of the time for things that are effectively done remotely, which, I mean, I find large meetings, for instance, of lots and lots of people really effectively done online, really, because actually you can see better who wants to speak. And in fact, kind of, you do, I've noticed this as well, kind of as a woman, kind of sometimes struggling with that, can I get my word in, kind of, you know, actually having that list down the side that says who put their hand up first means it's not the skill of catching the eye of the person chairing that means that you speak. You can just signal when you want to and it goes in turn. And so in those things, I think that's better, can often be better done remotely. So we have to be more conscious, I think, about how we manage our working lives and how we manage our timetables and structures and meetings and discussions than we were before. And I think that's, that kind of conscious leadership idea is something I wrote a piece to the department about kind of after our people survey results. So the civil service does a people survey once a year. And I have to admit that we were all slightly dreading the results this year because we all thought that they would be terrible, or last year's results. Gosh, it's almost a year since it was done last time, because we thought everyone's had such a tough year, it's been so hard, kind of these results are going to be really bad, everyone's really unhappy, they miss being in the office, they miss normal life, they've had all these pressures. And all of the kind of leadership and management scores went up. And do you know why? It's because people were having to think about it. And they were having to think about how they managed and led, and they were having to think about their employees' well-being. And that's the kind of thing that we need to keep hold of as we move into a different way of working in future. So a much more conscious way of doing what we do and not slipping into habits. And before I stop talking, which I've probably said enough, before I stop talking, just briefly to mention your sort of intersectionality point. One of my other jobs is being disability champion for the civil service. And I'd just briefly like to reflect some of the vast sort of range of views and experiences disabled colleagues have had during the pandemic. So for some, it's been transformative, being at home, not having to deal with the stresses and strains of travelling, especially on public transport if you have a physical disability, not having to sit for a long time in an uncomfortable set of surroundings, for people's kind of having sort of special tools and techniques like working online sometimes being kind of easier. And that's on one side. On the other side, many have suffered from real sense of loneliness and lack of support for them in special circumstances. So it's just another example, I think, of the way in which, if we're going to move to this more hybrid way, which I think we inevitably are, not least because of the potential savings in kind of office space and because of people's demands, we have to do it consciously, and we cannot let groups that already suffer kind of discrimination and take longer to progress in their careers to suffer more because they tend to be in the office less often. And that requires us to manage this consciously and professionally.
Wow. I realized what a long question I asked as you were talking. Thank you so much, Sarah, for wrapping it up so nicely. So I want to shift gears a little bit here. And we've talked about, individual experiences and, women's individual situations mostly. How about, organizational approaches, company culture? Sarah mentioned a little bit about that, but how do we need to shift our company cultures moving forward to adjust our, behaviors as leaders, as people managers? We all know, and I'm never going to get tired of repeating this, the pandemic disproportionately affected women negatively, with huge numbers leaving the workforce, just as much considering either leaving or downshifting. So let's start with the first step, right? How do we encourage women to take up their jobs back if they have left? Or how do we encourage them to keep them and not leave the workforce? And attached to that, maybe Mercedes, let's start with you. How can we ensure inclusive hiring practices and make them a norm? as a D&I practitioner, inclusive hiring practices is at the core of what I do day in, day out. And it's super important to me. I want to hear your thoughts about this particular situation. Like, how do we apply the inclusive hiring practices to this particular situation?
So I'll start with the first part of your question and then move to the second. So I think it's definitely something that obsesses us, the fact that we're seeing that, how do we, first of all, how do we bring more women to the industry is something that this is a worldwide problem in this industry. So it's how do we inspire more women? How do we give visibility of the opportunities it brings? Because these added value jobs that have to do with knowledge are also the best paid positions. So it's more demanded jobs, and it also translates into creating more equality in terms of the quality of those jobs and the pay. So we want to inspire more young girls to come to the industry. We launched an interesting program called Back in the Game in India. Because of maternity leaves being so long, women in the tech industry would become, their knowledge would become obsolete, or they would need some updates in order to return to the market. And when we tried to, take that same model to the Latin American countries where we found it's a very different problem there, because it's women who may have started engineering majors, or who may have started design or project management, and they have had to leave their studies because they became mothers, or because forced by some situation where they had to work and they quit their studies. So it was more like converting from different fields rather than having the same underlying problem. So definitely bringing more women to the industry is one of the things that we are concerned about and that we're working on through these different projects. It's also providing scholarships for women so that this looks like coding, looks like such a complex task that we are discouraged to during our schooling years. We're seeing that in especially in Latin American countries, that maths and science are not the main choices that young girls are making to continue their studies. So how do we bring this in an easy way where they can start seeing what's a myth and what is not? How complex can this be? How can we make it easier? How can we show the possibilities that the vast possibilities that this industry has? So that's one thing. On the other hand, we started measuring, dashboards, starting measuring how are women behaving? How are we recruiting women? Are we losing women? What is the pace at which women are growing in the company versus men? So we looked at this dashboard by countries, and we looked by seniority, and we looked in the different areas. And definitely we saw some interesting things that require awareness, as you were saying, Sarah, before, intention and sponsorship. We need the sponsorship of the company in order to act, and we need to have this we need to correct what is wrong. We need to focus on those areas that require an additional effort, and this is possible because we have the intention. So I think all of that is happening. We are looking at this dashboard by gender that we had not looked at before, and we are learning in this process, and we're acting and correcting things. And then on the other hand, in terms of inclusive practices, definitely diversity and inclusion starts with recruiting, and it's one of the main the main areas of challenge. So one of the things we did is we created a diverse pool of interviewers, where in every country we would have would have a diverse pool of people, where two people would be able to look at an interview result and define a seniority afterwards from different backgrounds, so that we would have two different views kind of building together, the feedback of the interview and the result of the seniority, which is also obviously, it determines a lot of things afterwards, because it determines a salary band, it determines a positioning. So it's that moment of truth where people start working, in which position, what is the salary that is being offered to them. And it's also been proven that, when I looked at the pay gaps and where we had pay gaps, those pay gaps were not due to our salary cycles. It was due to the point of entry. So those women were probably making less money in the past, in their previous jobs, so their expectations were based on a lower base. And that was a problem that we had to fix by, definitely drawing bands and saying this is a healthy point in the band, and let's not go underneath that point, even if it would fit, or satisfy somebody's expectations. This is a commitment that we're making, because otherwise it creates a problem that is a bigger problem to solve once it becomes a bulk problem. So let's solve it there. An interesting thing is that we also did a diverse and unconscious bias training for all, not only just the interviewers, but the decision makers. So let's face this fact. We all have biases. So let's understand what they are. Let's see how they operate on each one of us, and how, they are driving our decisions unconsciously. And we started working with that concept. Also, an interesting thing is we started measuring our leaders by how diverse and inclusive they are. So their teams are measuring in their feedback for leaders, they are measuring, okay, what type of a leader, and this is also, drafting like the model of the leader of the present, not of the future. These are the leaders that are managing diverse, complex, distributed teams in many different countries. So obviously, this is a competence and ability that we need to continue learning as companies, continue reinforcing and creating this culture of diversity and inclusion. We are diverse because we're based in 17 countries, but being inclusive is a much more of a bigger intention and effort, and we need to do it every day. It will never be completed. It will never be perfect. So it's an effort to improve on a daily basis. And I think, as I said, awareness, sponsorship and support, and also having this very specific intention where, it's not just a few people, it's not just the leaders, it's not just a people team, it's everyone's responsibility.
Absolutely, absolutely. So love the fact that you took it from a talent acquisition perspective. The recruitment is the first step of it, and I want to take it from there to the inside of the organization once women are in there. And Irene, if you don't mind, I want to go to you for this, because I know employee resource groups are at the heart of creating that inclusive culture in any given organization. So in my organization, we call it WIN, Women in Nielsen IQ. It's a win-win idea for all our women. What we have done throughout this past 2 years is try to look at the intersectional needs of women. And we, course corrected, we shifted our goals, we shifted this and that. But ultimately, our goal was to make sure that the culture was welcoming. It was, it had an inclusive language. And I want to go back to one thing Sarah mentioned earlier, is that one of the things we did was shifting our, child rearing language to parenting instead of maternity. Because I personally truly believe that it's not just mothers who take care of kids, and it should never be. And like Sarah, I'm lucky to say, or happy to say, that my husband agrees with me. It has never been my job. It was our job to rear our kids. But at the same time, when I look at the society, it's not the same thing, right? Like the societies I lived in, and I've lived in 4 different countries, never changed. The school expected me to be there with my kids. They assumed that I would take the day off from work to be with them. And when my husband showed up, he was the only father there in a sea of mothers, and he would be an outcast. So anyway, so all of these and all the inclusive language, the perspective, how does it happen at NASA through the employee resource groups?
And it's not just the employee resource group, it comes from the top. Like you guys keep
Of
mentioning,
course.
it is a culture thing. Even at the top level, there's a forum called the Inclusive Leadership Champions, and it's run by all the leadership where you mentioned unconscious bias. They provide that kind of training to make sure when these leaders are making decisions, are they filtering everything through their own biases. So again, it's culture at the top, it's culture everywhere within NASA. And you mentioned a language distinction. We actually created a subcommittee called JSC Parenting. And it includes not just the moms, but it's also the pops and everything in between. We even have subgroups within this, like single dads, single moms, single parents, all varieties, a whole rainbow assortment of parenting. It's been one of the most important bits to help navigate through this pandemic. We had these communities within teams. We have different channels where these parents from all walks of life are able to share stories of, how did I navigate these challenges? I have a special needs child. How did you get the resources to endure this pandemic, but yet be able to be a contributing person in this community? And also, I also want to make the distinction. I am a contractor for NASA, but it's almost like a badgeless society. That's part of the culture here. They just said straight out, like, I don't care that you're a contractor. You're able to be a leader here in the NASA community. So that's why I'm able to be a professional development chair for a NASA employee resource group. Yes, we could have our employee resource group within our contracting environments. But again, that's why NASA is one of the top places to work for civil servants, because of this very inclusive society. We don't care about contractor or not. We don't care if you've been in NASA for 50 plus years. We value this diverse perspective. We have different employee resource group for folks of disability. They call themselves No Boundaries. We have folks for the Asian American community, Hispanic community, the veterans community. I'm sure I'm forgetting different employee resource group, but they have been buoying all the community within NASA, knowing that there are folks like me that understand the struggles that I'm going through, but together we're finding ways here within the community and at the leadership level to address these issues.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we are going through the pandemic, we haven't stopped our efforts in mentorship, in sponsorship especially. We're highlighting more of that sponsorship aspect because we need people to help us promote us to different areas. Like you had mentioned, Mercedes, it's like sometimes we're just not aware of these things, and we need to help with the retention by highlighting these different opportunities and just maintaining that communication of, these are opportunities, you could do it. I went through the zigging and zagging in my own personal career. You could do it too. So throughout this whole pandemic, we've had Ask Me Anything events. We've had face-to-face virtually events with our leadership, the high-ranking leadership. We had our associate administrator here at Johnson Space Center and White Sands Test Facility in New Mexico. They're also kind of our sister center. And we've had a high-ranking leader also participate in a lessons learned event where folks were able to ask questions beforehand, and we did a very informal, hey, what was your career path like and how can I ascend through the ranks like you? So just having that community knowledge of oh, even though I'm a gal, I could certainly ascend through those ranks too, because I see these predecessors here and they're giving me the knowledge of within our community, within our culture, how can we navigate to that point too? So having that open communication like Sarah had talked about too, and the structuring, we are informing our leadership through these employee resource groups. We're getting the surveys, we're having these impromptu networking events just to gather the information to deliver back up to the leadership saying, these are the struggles our people are going through. We need to reevaluate how we're doing meetings because they're thinking, oh, you're in a virtual environment. We could have back-to-back meetings. But one of the feedback we have provided to our leadership is, let's stop having these meetings. Are they even important to have these meetings? Maybe we should consider stop having meetings at the top of the hour and the bottom of the hour. We need to have breaks in between each meeting. So perhaps we could start at the 15-minute mark so folks could have that bio break from the start of the hour. Just these little details like that. But this is feedback from the employee resource group. It's driven by just us listening and being able to openly communicate. And our leadership is finally embracing these employee resource group. They've even given us the head nod in these Ask Me Anything events. It's like, yes, it's because of these community building efforts of the employee resource group. Our folks are happy, they're able to contribute, they're able to be flexible. We understand your needs.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And through our employee resource groups, we did a similar thing. And going back to Sarah's comment about the feedback of our people for 2020, I was pleasantly surprised too. Our inclusion index went up. And our management scores went up too, because as Sarah said, people were paying more attention to what the actual needs were. We had listening sessions. We had we invited our EC level leaders to our listening sessions, and they did join. Our CEO joined a global listening session where people basically just vented about the horrors of COVID and the first 6 months of it. So anyhow, I want to move on to the future side of things. But before I do, one last question about how do we keep this culture inclusive and more fertile, so to speak, for women to grow. And Sarah, this question is going to be for you. How do you see that we are ensuring women receive career support and guidance once they are in a management track role? How do we lift them up? How does that look in the future of work for you?
Thank you. So, I mean, I can speak a little bit. I do think that, I hope I'm not making assumptions by assuming that for a lot of women working in the tech industry, they're actually much further back than the civil service in terms of kind of like the numbers of women in senior professions, the number of women who are kind of senior leaders. And so I wonder if I might just reflect on some of the things that have been done in government over the course of the last sort of 10, 20 years, where we've moved from, I mean, we're not at 50% at my level, but we're doing much better than we were. We're around sort of 35%, like nearly sort of edging towards 40%. And most of the sort of, and we're definitely going in the right direction, and the level below as well. So we've definitely, what have we done? Well, I mean, one is we pioneered some flexible working practices that are not quite so normal in other places a long time ago. So a lot of job sharing takes place in the civil service. In fact, I have 3 people who work to me in the most sort of senior sort of layer beneath me, and one of those is a job share, so it's actually 2 people. So that's one of the second most senior kind of level in the civil service, and I am quite convinced that within the next sort of short period of time we will have a job share as a permanent secretary. And that will send a completely fantastic kind of signal through the system. And in fact, the cabinet secretary, who's the head of the civil service, really had a kind of electrifying effect on the civil service about sort of 6-7 years ago, where he went to the launch of the kind of job share network across the civil service, which was also provided a kind of jobs board for people who wanted to job share. So often people want to job share, but if they haven't already found a partner, they won't be able to do it. And this was a sort of way in which you could post your kind of requirements and what you were looking to do, and then someone could find you. And he came to the launch and he said he couldn't think of a single job in the civil service that couldn't be done by a job share. And that had a kind of huge, really electrifying effect, that he had sort of put down the challenge, actually, where people used to write not suitable for part-time or job share. They increasingly don't say that. And actually, you can't say it unless you can really sort of prove it. And in fact, I don't really think anyone could prove that something couldn't be done by a job share, I'm afraid, you know. And in fact, as somebody who's managed a lot of job shares, many times actually male-female job shares, but also female-female job shares, I can tell you, I've never understood managers who didn't want to employ job sharers, because let me tell you, it's less work for you as a manager, because they do most of their problem solving together, and then they only come to you with the really tricky stuff, and you get more of them, and they're really enthusiastic and energetic when they're in the office, because they're not worn down by working sort of 5-6 days a week. So it's basically a kind of win-win. And I think offering those opportunities and making sure that they're signaling from a very senior level. It is all about culture. So that is so hard to change. It's so hard to change. But I do think some of it is about senior women taking responsibility for challenging comments and behaviours which can let cultures become ingrained. So things like making sure that even if a woman isn't signalling to speak in a meeting, that you encourage her to come in. We all know that experience of thinking your comment isn't going to be very interesting, and then a man makes it and everyone goes, oh yeah, very interesting, very interesting. And so you can sort of switch that by making sure you're deliberately looking to bring people out. I think it was Irene mentioned sponsorship. I think sponsorship is so much more important than mentorship. A kind of long-term mentorship is great, but a long-term relationship where somebody is looking out for you is important. All of the different kind of techniques that Mercedes mentioned for recruitment are also important for talent management. So ensuring that when you identify talented people, you are making sure that you are not kind of being biased in how you are doing that, because actually those sort of key talent programs I think are so important for women, because if you take time out of the workplace, sometimes when you come back in, people can be a bit like, oh, well, you seem to be progressing more slowly, so maybe actually you used to be good, but you're sort of not anymore. And if you've got the kind of imprimatur of a talent sort of program on you, I think that can help to correct some of that. How you do recruitment, so sifting, being kind of name blind, so people can't tell whether it's who it is that's applying. They're just looking at the kind of facts and the form and the kind of details of the application. Really important for progression, and progression is important as a signal. I think just being open and talking about these things can have a huge impact. And I'm trying to think of more sort of things that we did internally, but definitely all of those things to do with how we did challenge, sort of being prepared to say, no, you can't say that. Because we found that the civil service is an odd organisation, because we're part of the same organisation, but all working in different bits of it, so in different departments. And when I did some work on this it must have been about 10 years ago now, the differences in culture between organisations were really vast. And in some organisations, it was culturally acceptable to say that, say, somebody couldn't get a top box marking if they'd been on maternity leave. And in other organisations, that wouldn't, I mean, the person wouldn't have even said it, because it would have been so obvious from the very start that it wasn't an acceptable thing to say. And I think as senior women, we have responsibility for ensuring that we do pick up and support women who come behind us, and are making sure that the workplace is a more welcoming place for them more consistently than it always was for us.
Amen to that, Sarah. Thank you. So, although the picture before us is not super bright, we've talked about the numbers, we've talked about the realities. I don't believe it's all doom and gloom. I really don't. And just being here talking to you all has empowered me, has energized me, and I want to thank you for that. So from there, let's take a look into the future, right? Looking forward, what does the future of work look like for women, in your opinion, as an individual, but also as a leader? What is your key priority for future of work for women? And I want to go around the table, or around our squares, and I want to start with Irene. if you don't mind.
Absolutely. For me personally, it's just being able to be better in communicating my boundaries. This has been an exercise in, have I really learned? I keep saying, yes, I need to set boundaries. It's not just me, it's also my colleagues too. It's like, can we collectively learn how to communicate better and recognizing each other's needs? Like they might be able to say, oh, Irene's getting to that burnout point. She's not communicating her boundaries. So let me be an advocate for her. And can I be an advocate for my other folks too? It's not just relying on my leadership, my supervisor or manager to recognize she's on burnout. It's being able to communicate that to others. So as the professional development chair, I hope I could help instill that skill set, finding other leaders to help spread that message of let's communicate, let's work together, understand each other's circumstances, let's be advocates for one another, let's sponsor each other's professional development here. Let's find opportunities to boost our folks. Another finding that we have been relating to leadership is focus more on celebrating your people. Yes, you keep giving them more orders, communicating, giving them information overload, but have you taken the chance to pause and say, thank you? Thank you for your great work. We recognize you're in under trying situations, but you're doing wonderful work and you're really advancing the mission. So I hope we collectively, as NASA Johnson Space Center, be able to balance the, okay, we understand you need your boundaries, but we also recognize you're doing great work.
Awesome. Thank you, Irene. Mercedes, how about you? How does the future look like?
So I think it's a very it's hard to answer because I think it's going to be very different. Again, we see very different realities in different countries for different groups of women, for different ages. But I think it's definitely going to be a hybrid model. So I think when we look at our surveys, 70% of our people are saying they want to work in some sort of hybrid model. So we're listening, and organizations are listening to that. And actually, it's very compelling to hear the numbers of the percentages of people who said they would quit their jobs if they were forced to return to that previous stage where we all had to go to the office 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 commute. I think that model is no longer a valid model. That hybrid model will give us this flexibility, but as you said, there are some interesting things or dark sides also about flexibility. So boundaries is one of them, as you were mentioning before, Irene. So setting our boundaries is going to be definitely a challenge. I think communication is another challenge because we have to be very clear about what's expected. We have to have channels of communication that are open. We need to be able to check and recheck if those priorities are valid, the pace at which organizations move, and these priorities and the different scenarios and uncertainty. It requires that we are able to check and recheck. So flexibility also requires trust. Otherwise, it's very easy to get that flexibility stigma that you were mentioning before, Fanda, which is, are you working? Are you being as productive as, I think you would be if I were seeing you every day and we were sharing office? So I think that's one thing that for us organizations, how do we create trust, environments where trust and where we are able to, as you said, also um, confidence. How are we able to create that confidence? And leadership is going to be even more crucial than before in order to help us create this environment or this virtuous organizations. Obviously it's going to be organizations that I think the learnings that we have the things that we have learned, the experiences that we have had due to COVID are going to transform. There's no way we can go backwards. So we're going to have to create more human organizations where we revise our policies. What was true before may no longer be true, and it may not fit every size. It's one policy for it that will not fit every individual need. So again, we'll have to revise constantly. And I think, I don't know, I imagine that we will have to continue working with a lot of commitment in terms of creating this uh, safe workspaces where, that are more equitable, and where everything we do needs to be revised, and we will never get to that point where everything is accomplished. It's like a never ending process where we can always do better. We can always, there's always one space where affirmative action is still needed. And I think sponsorship, as you were mentioning before, is absolutely crucial. I think women who are in that, we have an objective for 2025 to have parity in our management roles in terms of gender. So we need to work very hard in order to produce that. And as you were mentioning, different cultures, is really what we need to change. So I think if we get together with different actors in the system, education is crucial. I think we cannot do it by ourselves, not one individual, not for women, like we are right here in this panel, but we really need to get together, different actors, different perspectives working together. I think we're going to have a much more fluent dialogue and co-working experience. We need to create those environments where, honestly, we can ensure that we're creating more meritocratic and more virtuous organizations. And it's going to be a wonderful challenge. And I think we will see, and we have already seen, as you were mentioning before also, Sarah, in the last years, we have seen evolution. We have seen that, us as human beings have evolved. So I think there's no way we can go back, and we'll just have to continue up in the ladder, creating more virtuous practices at every stage, at every level, honestly.
Thank you, Mercedes. Sarah, anything you want to add to this question about future?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. And obviously I talked a little bit about kind of some of the challenges of creating hybrid and mixed models of working earlier. So I'll just finish with this. I mean, I am a relentlessly optimistic person, and I am convinced that the future of work for women is brighter than the past. I am convinced that this experience, we will make the best of it. We will learn good things from it. We need to, not everywhere, not all the time, and not quickly, perhaps, but we will. We need to remember kind of, we talked about the sort of disparity of impact on women. I think it's also worth remembering that actually the experience of being at home has made a big difference to men, and many of them say they want to spend more time with their children, and that gives us a kind of opportunity for greater equality. But mainly, I just think women should reflect on the extraordinary resilience that they've shown and the amazing things that they've managed to do in incredibly pressing and difficult circumstances. I'm so proud of what my department has achieved in the last year and a half. They've done astonishing things in really difficult circumstances, and just think, considering that when circumstances are easier than they've been for the last 18 months, surely it will be more extraordinary again.
Wonderful. I mean, what a wonderful way to close up this conversation on a positive note. And I would like to echo that. I think it is upon us to brighten the future. And the resilience, as you said, Sarah, is we have shown that resilience. We have proven once again, even if it wasn't needed, we have proven once again that we will stand up regardless. And I'm not just talking about, female workforce, right? Like as human beings all together. And we have proven that we can be amazing allies to each other when in desperate situations. So with that in mind, thank you so much. For sure, my day has been brightened by this conversation. I really am empowered and energized by the conversation. Thank you so much. Looking forward to continuing our conversation elsewhere. Thank you.